Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the Marthanil Archipelago playing as the forces of the Lizardmen against the forces of the Orcs. And in this match I wanted to break a few of the new units, mess around, test them out, because there's a lot I haven't really done with the Lizardmen. I've mostly been playing Skaven, well, to be honest, mostly Empire and Dwarves probably against those armies, but I've been doing quite a bit of Skaven play on the side, and I haven't done too much Lizardmen, so yeah, here we're doing Lizards. And I wanted to try out a whole bunch of stuff. So for my Lord, I brought a Red Crested King Chief. Now, this guy is actually quite the baller. He's very cheap, which is amazing. Like, this Lord right here with his kit, all I brought was the Warrior's Crest, and I think he cost me, like, I want to say 1,100 or 1,000 gold. And look at those stats: 63 melee attack with poison and AP and a bonus versus large. He's got melee defense of 45, which isn't bad. 80 armor, very high speed of 78. Good charge bonus. He's just an absolute boss, and he costs you nothing essentially. He's so cheap, and it's awesome. Plus, he looks dope. Like, look at this guy with his pole arm there and horn one. Just looks amazing. Now, besides that, for my caster, I did decide to roll with Lord Kroak, and I've been giving Kroak sort of just trying him out fairly often. I'm trying to figure out if just a lot of people are accusing him of being OP. I'm still on the fence. I don't know where I'd put him. He's definitely pretty powerful though, and I wanted to give him a shot here against the Greenskins. We did bring Supreme Shield of the old ones, of course, which gives us 44% damage resist. He does have his AoE Golden Death Masks, which grants melee attack reduction and big AoE. Deliverance of Itza is just baked in. That's his baseline kit. He's, of course, unbreakable as Strider, all that good stuff. And he's pretty resistant to range damage. He's got magic resist of 25%, missile resist of 40%. It's worth noting, though, that he is vulnerable to fire. So if you get fire units on him, a dragon or a phoenix or something, he'll be doing some good work. But I guess the phoenix does magic damage, so it probably gets negated. He's also not very good in combat, as you can kind of tell. He does have high weapon strength, surprisingly, but everything else is pretty trash. So he's basically just a spell bot. Now, alongside that, for our main line, it's simply a horde of Saurus warriors with shields, with the Temple Guard Regiment around, Star Chamber Guardians here in the center, anchoring things, alongside the Thunderous one, who is the Regiment of Renown, Ancient Stegodon, who randomly casts Lightning Strike around himself, which is kind of cool. It makes it very difficult to counter this guy by blobbing, because he can potentially nuke you with a Lightning Strike. That said, it is a fairly expensive Regiment of Renown. It's 2,300 gold, so definitely a bit tough to use. On the one flank, we do have the Sotek Regiment of Renown Red Crests, who do have Unbreakable as well as Refuse to Die, which means that they can't die while it's active. And it's actually an ability you can cast over and over. It's got a 60-second cooldown, so it's pretty spammable. In my opinion, that's actually a bit of a mistake. I think if there's one thing that makes these guys OP, probably, is the fact that you can use Refuse to Die multiple times. In my opinion, it should be one use, so you have to time it. But just throwing in some input there before we get going. Alongside that, we do have an Ancient Salamander. There's not much to be said for him. He launches single fireballs that do a fairly decent explosion. Has good range, has AP. Is not very good at melee, to be honest. His melee stats are pretty low, but he can definitely do some good damage at range. He's got Terror, and he does have Primal Instinct, so definitely a pretty cool unit. We're trying to chip away at some enemy troops here. Unfortunately, my opponent did have this Archer line, so that kind of zones me away immediately. I ran away like a chicken. He's got the Rusty Arrows as well as 2 Night Goblin Archers, who are getting mown down there by the blow darts on the guy's back. Besides that, my opponent's build is centered on this Doomdiver Catapult, which has been buffed in the last patch to have AP damage. I'm not entirely sure what he was shooting at in the early game. I think maybe the Thunderous one, which is not a bad target if you got AP. It makes you like a mini bolt thrower, or a homing bolt thrower, basically. Besides that, he's got Crimson Killers and Black Orcs, very powerful units against the Lizardmen. An Orc Shaman with Foot of Gork, Gaze of Mork, and here we go. So definitely some good spells there. So goblins, we mentioned some Night Goblins in the front line, which I think is not really necessary. You don't really need those guys. Some Broken Dust Mob as well as Boar Big Guns on the flank. These guys are a bit underpowered, I'd say. So not necessarily the most competitive unit. And then an Orc War Boss. So an interesting choice. This guy does, of course, have Waaagh. He's on a Wyvern, so he's got some pretty mean punching power. He does have Foe Seeker. He does have Opal Amulet, and yeah, he's a pretty mean customer. I don't know how expensive the Orc War Boss is on the Wyvern. If he's fairly cheap, he actually might not be terrible. But I do feel that Azak's usually better. Now, on the flank here, my opponent is getting a cheeky little charge on my Sars with his Boar Boys. You can see the Sars, though, countercharging, actually doing quite a bit of damage. Wa does go off, which is definitely nasty, but too soon for the Orcs. And you can see we're going to be getting a Deliverance of Eitzel on these poor Orc Boar Boys. And you can see a little sun there forming, slowly, surely collecting power, draining it from the earth, and is going to be... My opponent doesn't notice it because he was too focused on his Orc War Boss over there, and it is just devastating. Just deletes those poor Boar Boys. This entire unit. And keep in mind, these guys have over 100 HP per model, and they lost like 3/4 of their, or 2/3 of their HP. These guys got completely deleted because they were already beat up. These guys were borderline deleted, and instantly this whole fight is swung. And that was probably about, I don't know, 2,000, maybe like 1,500 gold worth of damage. Now, sure, it was for an 18 Winds of Magic spell, but still, very, very nasty. And in the meantime, the Saracen Temple Guard just piling through alongside of the Thunderous one. My opponent trying to stop me. He is pushing in a Goblin Big Boss, who I actually forgot about. But we're actually going to block him here with our Red Crested King Chief, who's going to be able to lay the smackdown on him. Foot of Gork does go down, but it is not that powerful. I think it was a normal cast too, which isn't as good as the overcast version. So we are gonna, in the meantime, we are going to be casting a Deliverance of Eitzel as well on the Crimson Killers. They are at about 6,000 HP, and they get rocked for a good 4,000 or so HP. So that was just brutal. Maybe like 3,500, but still just devastating stuff. Kroak is in here, applying his melee attack debuff, making these guys much worse in melee, and that's actually rough for Orcs who don't have really greatest melee stats to begin with. Gazemork is going in here and doing very little to the Thunderous one, and the Rampage goes on. You can see we're just plowing through, overrunning my opponent. At this point, is basically kind of GG. The Ancient Salamander here is up to 65 kills, and I kind of didn't highlight that, but he was sniping away at the Rusty Arrows and the Night Goblins, and he got some really good explosions in there with his Fire Breath. And my opponent trying to pursue with the Wyvern, so we are actually going to sort of run through our infantry here to protect our Ancient Salamander. I don't know why my opponent was so angry about the Salamander. The Salamander is, and was in my opinion, not that high priority of a target. And you can see the War Boss there taking some mean chunks of damage from the Saurus, especially, who just hit like trucks. He's only got 70 armor. Elsewhere, the Red Crested Skinks just running amok. They're up to 20-some kills. I'm using them to run down the Crimson Killers because they're so quick. Look at these guys. They're insane. They're all red. Look really cool. And poor Crimson Killers, though. I love that unit, but they got to die here. Over here, the Thunderous one is going to pursue the Black Orcs off the field, getting shot in the back with a Gazemork there, but I wasn't too concerned about that. You can see the Fireball there hitting those guys and immediately routs them. It doesn't actually apply the burnt effect. That, for example, the but you can see that single shot. I don't know if that single shot gave him like 17 kills or if that was 2 shots, but it doesn't look very impressive, but it does a lot of damage. And it doesn't apply the burnt effect. It just applies flammable, so it's meant to synergize with other fire damage dealers. But still pretty potent stuff. Over here, the Red Crested King Chief has popped Warrior's Crest. He's putting this moves on this Orc War Boss, who did pop Wah, but that's not going to save you, buddy. The Saurus are in here, crumping these Night Goblins. The Salamander actually dives in there, because I was just trying to keep the Salamander alive. At this stage of the game, it didn't really matter too much, but hey, I did want to try. The Orc War Boss at this point is going to shatter to army losses, so the Salamander will live to fight another day. It's such an amazing looking unit, really. But yeah, that is GG. There's still that pocket of AP loonies who just died, and that is game for the Lizards. Now, certainly I think some of the results in that game did boil down to my opponent's inattentiveness. He missed 2 casts of Deliverance of Eitzel, which deleted multiple cav units and the Crimson Killers. That said, I don't think there's too much counterplay options. If you have to engage your opponent in melee at some point, Deliverance of Eitzel does no friendly fire, so there's no risk involved, and it's a fairly cheap spell. So at 18 Winds of Magic, so it's kind of risk free. And Kroak's definitely brutal. Now you are paying, at least with the kit I brought, you're paying like 1,800 for a caster who can't do very much. Besides do spells and cast his Shield of the Old Ones. But the damage output is pretty ridiculous. And it's very difficult to dodge, because if you turn around to avoid it, and if you're tied down in melee, which is usually what the Lizardmen player will do, I get you stuck in melee, then you're going to be taking damage as you're fleeing as well. So it's it's nasty. It's a really powerful spell there. Not sure if how Kroak should be rebalanced. I'm thinking maybe. I definitely think the range on Deliverance of Itza should be shorter. I think the fact that you can cast it almost anywhere on your army is very, very powerful. I do think that Kroak perhaps should be a little more expensive, or maybe the Winds of Magic cost should be a little more expensive, because Deliverance of Itza is just really, really strong and really just brutal against anything. Literally anything that isn't monstrous infantry or single entity monsters gets basically deleted by Deliverance of Itza. It's like the old Dwellers Below, essentially. Except without the risk of deleting your own troops. Which, at least with the Dwellers Below old school version, you had to sacrifice something, unless you flew in like a single lord to bait your opponent. You had to sacrifice something to get that awesome Dwellers Below nuke. Now, you don't have to do that. You don't have to cast a good Dwellers Below, you know, even. So, I think it definitely needs some sort of tuning down, either damage-wise, Lord Kroak nerf-wise, or cost per cast-wise. Besides that, the Ancient Summon did surprisingly good work. Now he's a fairly cheap character, so I'm not sure how I feel. I feel like the rest of the roster, by and large, is pretty good. The Red Crested King Chief definitely doing some work. Very nice cheap lord. The Red Crested King cohort, the cohort of Sotek, I think should lose the reuse as of refusing to die. I feel like that should be an ability you only get to use once, and you have to time it well. Because it's already a very strong ability to use once, but then getting it over and over for every 60 seconds can be pretty insane in a slightly longer game. And yeah, those are kind of my 2 cents. Definitely Kroak is a bit of a concern. For my opponent's build, not necessarily the most competitive, I would say. Obviously, the Orc War Boss forces you to bring a caster. I think Wartsag is probably the best way to go in this matchup. Probably Wartsag. The new Ragnarok Queen might actually be good against the Lizards, because you can use her to deal with those single entities much more effectively. She could probably stop like the Thunderous one in his tracks, or hunt after Kroak. Pressure backlines a little bit, or distract with her Spiderlings. And she's expensive, but so is like the Thunderous one and units like that. So I could definitely see the Spider Queen being pretty good in this matchup, or just the Ragnarok Spiders in general, especially if buffed. I don't think the Goblin Big Boss is really worth it either. Or the Night Goblins. I think Night Goblins, especially the Fanatics, are just not that great against the Lizards. The Lizards tend to have lots of entity per model. So even if you get a perfect Fanatics off, you're not going to get too much value out of it. And my opponent actually brought Fanatics for his Night Goblin Archers too, which I really wouldn't say. That's like 200 gold down the drain, essentially, in my opinion. But that's just my 2 cents. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it fun to watch Kroaking some orcs. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, don't hesitate to post them down below, and I'll do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.